Nobody on that range ever forgot what happened next. Not the 40 rangers who stood behind the safety barrier in the dark. Not the range crew who killed the floodlights 20 minutes later and walked back to the barracks in single file without saying a word to each other. Not Private Eli Mack, 20 years old and 3 months into his first posting, who bit down so hard on his own back teeth that he chipped the enamel and did not notice until the following morning when the coffee hit it. What happened was this. A woman put a round through a target at 1,000 meters. In darkness. 7-mile crosswind from the left. No spotter, no assist, one shot, and the range speaker confirmed what the scoring system had already recorded. And the man standing at the front of the line, the man who was supposed to acknowledge a shot like that, walked to the firing position instead, looked at the scoring board, looked at her, and kicked her rifle into the mud. That was the first thing. The second thing, the thing none of them could explain later, the thing that stayed longer than the shot itself, was what she did after. Nothing. She lay in the mud for 2 full seconds. Then she pushed herself up, walked to the rifle, picked it up, wiped the scope housing with the hem of her shirt, walked back to the mat, lay down, and said 4 words. Range is still open, Master Sergeant. No anger, no tears, no argument. Just 4 words and a woman settling back into position behind a rifle that was longer than her torso, ready to run the shot again. As if the man who had just knocked her sideways into a red clay berm did not merit the energy of a complete sentence. As if the 60 degrees of temperature difference between a Louisiana midnight and a July floor in Kandahar had taught her something about patience that no one else on that firing line had been required to learn. Tatum stared at the back of her head for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked away without dismissing the formation. And that was when every man on that line understood, though not one of them could have said it cleanly, that they were watching something they did not have a category for. Not submission, not weakness, something more disciplined than either, something they would spend the next 72 hours being forced to name one bewildering hour at a time. Her name was Specialist Tara Wynn. She was 23 years old. She had been at JRTC Fort Polk for 9 days. She had requested the assignment herself, a fact that 212 personnel currently on post either did not know or had not thought to ask about. She was 5'4" and 132 pounds when wearing full kit. Her hair was blonde, pulled back tight against the Louisiana humidity, a few strands loose around her temples where the heat had worked them free. Her eyes were the color of old ice, the pale gray blue that reads as calm from a distance until you are close enough to realize it is not calm at all, but something more controlled than calm. Something that has decided not to spend itself on anything that does not require it. She wore a gray athletic crop top, the fabric a close stretch that followed every line of her frame from collarbone to hemline, the hem cutting well above her navel, the neckline a wide U that left her throat and collarbones fully bare. The fabric was designed for movement, and it showed everything movement requires. The lean musculature of her shoulders, the flat plane of her stomach, now carrying a streak of red Louisiana clay from the firing mat. On her right bicep, clear against the gray fabric, a tattoo of an eagle's head in black and dark gray ink. Beak open, eyes fixed on something in the middle distance that nobody else in the vicinity could locate. She wore Ranger camouflage trousers and a tactical belt loaded with equipment that most of the men watching her had needed years to learn how to use correctly. 40 Rangers stood behind the safety barrier and watched her lie back down behind the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, the Harris bipod resettled on the mat, the Schmidt and Bender scope reinstalled with the scope cover off. The rifle was longer than her torso. She handled it without any particular ceremony, the way a carpenter handles a hammer he has used long enough that it no longer requires introduction. The range speaker crackled. She exhaled once, half a breath, stopped. The second shot split the Louisiana night the same way the first one had. Target 1,000 meters, confirmed hit. Tatum did not move this time. He stood at the line with his arms at his sides and his jaw set and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not make the situation worse, and the 40 men behind him said nothing either. And the silence that followed the second confirmed hit at 1,000 meters in a 7-mile crosswind had a texture to it that none of them would accurately describe for the rest of their careers. but they would all carry it. Tatum walked away without a word. Mac, in the back row, watched him go. He looked at the woman disengaging from the firing position with the same unhurried economy she had used for everything else. He looked at Destiny Raines, 21 years old and 2 years into her service, standing 4 men to his left with her right hand wrapped around her rifle sling until the nylon had cut a red line across her palm. Neither of them spoke. Wynne slung the M2010 over her right shoulder and walked off the range into the dark. She did not look at anyone. Gord Tatum was 41 years old and had spent 15 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment building, something that institutions reward and men confuse with quality. He was 6'2" and 230 pounds of uninterrupted authority. 3 consecutive years as top-ranked marksman in the regiment, a chest arranged with ribbons, a posture that communicated, in the precise language of military bearing, that he expected the world to confirm the story he had always told about himself. I was the kind of man who had stopped being genuinely challenged so long ago that he had forgotten challenge was something that could arrive from an unexpected direction and in an unexpected shape. I was about to be reminded. He just did not know it yet. After the range cleared, Wynne walked back toward the billeting area. The Louisiana night was thick with pine resin and the industrial exhaust of generators and the particular weighted air of summer that settles on the chest and does not move. Raines caught up at the corner of the barracks and matched her pace. "Are you okay?" "Yeah." "Because what he did back there?" Raines stopped herself, tried again. "I should have said something." "No." Wynne said it without breaking stride and without any edge in it. "A statement of fact the way you state the direction of the wind. You shouldn't have." Raines looked at her sideways. "That's not how most people respond to that." "I know." They reached the women's billet door. Wynne stopped. She looked at Raines for a moment with those flat, pale eyes. And Raines had the experience of being assessed by something that possessed more patience than she could comfortably imagine. And the assessment was not unkind, but it was complete. And when it was finished, she had the distinct feeling that she had been sorted. "Get some sleep," Wynne said. "Tomorrow's a long day." She went inside. The room was small and smelled of the institutional cleaner that never quite removed what it was trying to remove. An old wood, and the particular dry air smell of a building that has been heated and cooled by the same system for 30 years. Wynne sat on the edge of her bunk for 30 seconds without moving. Then she reached under the mattress and took out a small notebook with a black cover, the kind sold at any drugstore. Nothing military about it. She opened it near the back. The page held a list of 12 names in small, precise handwriting. 9 of them carried a single line through them. The 10th name on the list was Gord Tatum, written in the same hand and the same size as the others. She uncapped a pen and wrote one word beside his name. Confirmed. She closed the notebook and returned it under the mattress. She lay back in her full kit and stared at the ceiling and thought about GPS transponder, battery serial numbers, and about documentation, and about the patience required to build a thing correctly over 18 months, when the temptation to move faster was constant and the reasons for moving carefully were better. She did not sleep for a long time. At 0600, the following morning, Sergeant First Class Raymond Prewitt was in the hallway outside the chow hall. He was 45 years old, officially assigned to the JRTC rotation as medical support, and his face showed the particular weathering of a career spent being the person in each room who knew more than he could say and had spent 25 years finding ways to be useful anyway. He fell into step beside Wynne without preamble. "Let me look at that shoulder." "It's fine." "I'm saying it professionally. It's professionally fine." He kept walking with her. She did not stop him. After 10 meters, he lowered his voice to a pitch that would not carry 3 feet. "I knew him. Tatum, 2009, Kandahar rotation." Wynne's pace adjusted by half a step. Less than an inch per stride. Someone not paying very close attention would not have caught it. "I know you did," she said. Prewitt looked at her, something resolved behind his eyes that had been unresolved before. "How long have you been building this?" She said nothing for a moment. The Fort Polk morning was coming up pink and gray through the pines, and somewhere across the compound a formation was beginning its day. The sound of boots on packed earth moving through the still air like a tide. 18 months, she said, since the day he filed the report. Prewitt walked beside her in silence long enough for the formation sound to fade. Then, "When you're ready, Tell me first." She nodded once and turned toward the briefing building and did not look back. Operation Iron Meridian was briefed at 0800 in a room that smelled of dry erase markers in the collective wariness of people who had not yet decided how to feel about what they were being asked to participate in. Colonel Avery Strock stood at the front. He was 57 years old, a Gulf War veteran with close-cropped gray hair and the manner of a man who communicates exactly what he intends and nothing more, and has been doing it for so long that the restraint no longer requires any effort. The off-for-composition slide stopped the room. 3 personal, Win, Prewit, 1 AI-assisted targeting coordination system on a hardened laptop. Their objective, hold the C-7 training sector against the full Ranger assault force for 72 hours. 160 Rangers organized into 2 combat companies. Against 3, 0 permitted casualties on either side. Paint marking rounds and laser designation systems for 90% of engagements, with full live fire protocols available only under specific command authorization requiring Colonel Strock's direct sign-off. Of those 160 Rangers, Tatum was assigning 34 of his best men, his direct assault element, to take C7, 34 versus 3. Strock did not explain his reasoning. He moved to the next slide. Tatum was in the second row. He looked at the offer roster and turned to the sergeant beside him without lowering his voice. 3 people. One of them's a girl in a crop top. This'll be over by lunch. 2 men laughed. Several smiled. Strock made a small mark in the margin of his notes without looking up. In the last row, Wynne was writing in the black notebook. She did not look at Tatum. She had not looked at him since the range. At 1:30, Tatum denied Wynne's request to access the 1,000-meter range for a pre-exercise equipment check. It was a marginal call by any objective measure, the kind of low-friction scheduling dispute that most officers resolve in 2 sentences. Strock happened to be passing through the hallway outside the range office at the moment the denial came through. He paused. He looked toward the range. Then he turned toward Wynne and nodded once, barely visible. She went to the range. The range crew had stepped away. The crosswind flags were up at 4 o'clock position, steady from the left. She set 5 paper targets at 5 distances, 400 meters, 600, 800, 950, 1100. She shot all 5 in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Center mass on each. The Schmidt and Bender needed 2 clicks of elevation between the 400 and the 800, nothing between 800 and 950. The 1100-meter target required a specific breath cycle and a trigger press adjustment she had refined over 2 years of range work. A micro-calibration so particular that her former unit's armorer had watched it once and told her he had never seen anything like it and could not explain what he was seeing. She noted the conditions, the adjustments, and the results in the black notebook. And then she walked back toward the compound. Mac was crossing the range access road on his way back from the motor pool. He glanced at the scoring board as he passed. He stopped. He looked at the 5 targets at their 5 distances. He looked at the marks. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, doing arithmetic that produced a number he had not expected. Then he looked in the direction Wynne had gone and stood there for another 5 seconds before he started walking again. That afternoon, Wynne sat alone in the equipment room with the window open and closed her eyes. The wind moved through the gap. It was warm and wet and carried the specific weight of Louisiana summer. And for a fraction of a second it felt wrong. Too much moisture, not the dry, particular heat she remembered. And her body registered what her mind was already releasing. She had been on a packed earth floor in Kandahar for 20 hours total. 14 waiting for the mission window. 6 more waiting for corrected coordinates from a sergeant first class named Deering, who had entered the wrong grid reference and would not acknowledge it. The floor temperature by noon was 47 degrees Celsius. She had managed her core temperature the way she managed everything that was trying to push her out of position, by slowing down, by making herself smaller, by deciding that the discomfort was a variable to be accounted for rather than a reason to move. When she returned to the base, her right shoulder carried a first-degree burn from the superheated earth. The hair on the right side of her head was singed at the ends from lying against the clay. The mission had succeeded. Deering filed the after-action report and listed execution error as the cause of the 6-hour delay. The error was hers, the report said. Strock had been the reviewing officer at Kandahar. He had looked at the report, then looked at her across the desk and said, Get some rest, specialist. She had said, yes, sir. Nothing official happened. Deering was transferred to a training billet in Georgia 4 months later, which was close enough to a consequence that most people who noticed it counted it and moved on. Wynn opened her eyes in the equipment room at Fort Polk and picked up the M2010 and began disassembling it in the fading afternoon light. She did not need to see what her hands were doing. Bolt carrier, firing pin, trigger assembly, each component placed on the cloth in order, smallest to largest. Her hands moved through it automatically while her mind was elsewhere, thinking about GPS transponder, battery housings, and serial numbers, and the equipment check forms she had filed in triplicate that morning. Each copy routed to a different desk, none reachable by any authorization Tatum held. She had been building this for 18 months. 1,000 meters, 2 shots, both confirmed. She was not in a hurry. At 2200, Rains found her on the roof of the equipment building, lying on her back looking at stars. The M2010 was propped against the ventilation housing. The black notebook lay open on her chest. "Why are you off her?" Rains said. "You are the best shot in this entire rotation. Everyone knows it, even the ones who won't say it." Wynn looked at the sky. "That's why." "That doesn't make sense." A pause, the length of one generator cycle. "It will." Rains looked at her, at the profile in the half-light, the eagle tattoo on her right bicep visible where the sleeve had ridden, the beak of the bird open, its eyes fixed on something in the darkness that only it could see. "When he hit you tonight," Rains said, "I almost said something. My mouth was already open." "I know, I saw you." "You saw me." "Yes." The generator hummed. An owl crossed above the tree line in silence. "Why didn't you want me to?" Rains said. Wynn was quiet for a moment. The notebook rose and fell on her chest. Then, "Because if you had, they'd have handled it informally. Someone's office, a conversation, a note in a file. He shakes a hand. He's back on the range by Thursday. I needed him to keep going." "How long have you been planning this?" Wynn closed the notebook. She held it out so Rains could see the worn black cover, the spine creased from months of opening and closing. "That's a log. Every day since I got orders for this rotation. Every interaction, timestamps, witnesses, actions taken and actions not taken, and everything before this rotation, going further back." She took the notebook back and held it against her chest. "Documentation is the difference between what happened and what can be proven." She sat up, looked at Rains directly, the pale eyes level and without performance. "You're going to see things in the next 72 hours that won't make sense. Things I do that look wrong or slow, or like I'm not responding the way I should." She held the look for one full second. "Trust the process, not me. The process." Rains held her gaze, then she nodded. Wynn stood, picked up the M2010. "Get some sleep. Range at 05. Rains watched her go. She sat for a while longer in the dark, turning over the word documentation the way you turn over a word that has just changed weight in your hands. In the equipment storage room on the first floor of the main support building, at approximately 2300 hours, Master Sergeant Gord Tatum stood alone in front of the up-for-gear rack. He had a key, normal. He had scheduling authority over equipment assignments, also normal. He moved to the GPS transponder allocated to the OPFOR team, a small olive drab unit the size of a deck of cards, designed to broadcast position data to the umpire network during training. In a live fire scenario, loss of signals triggered an automatic safety stand down. The system existed to protect personnel who could not be directly observed by range officers. Tatum opened the battery compartment. He removed the charge pack and placed it in his left breast pocket. From his right pocket, he took an identical pack. Same housing, same dimensions, same connector color. It held no charge. He seated the dead pack, closed the compartment, set the transponder back on the rack, and looked at it for a moment in the dark. Then he turned off the light and walked out. At the far end of the building, Doc Prewitt had been walking back from the latrine. He heard the storage room light go off. He heard the door. He pressed himself against the wall and held still. Tatum passed without seeing him. The footsteps faded. Prewitt waited. Then he went to the storage room, opened it, looked at the transponder on the rack. He did not touch it. He photographed it with the personal phone in his left cargo pocket, making sure the battery compartment, panel, and serial number were both visible in frame. He noted the timestamp. He walked out. He went directly to Wynn's bunk and knocked twice on the doorframe. She was awake. She was always awake. He told her exactly what he had seen in order, with times. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked at her right hand resting flat on the black notebook on her bunk. He confirmed, she said. Confirmed what? She looked up at him with those old ice eyes, no alarm in them, no acceleration. The GPS will broadcast me as stationary at my last log position when the exercise starts. He thinks he'll know exactly where I am every minute of 72 hours. He thinks he has the advantage. He thinks he has the advantage. She said it the way you confirm weather. That's the last thing he'll believe he has. She opened the notebook, wrote confirmed beside Tatum's name, then wrote a number next to that word. The number was 1. Get some sleep, Doc. Tomorrow it starts. She lay back and closed her eyes. The generator hummed outside. The warm Louisiana night pressed against the window screens. From the far side of the compound came the steady sound of a perimeter guard making his route, boots on packed earth, regular and patient in the dark. Before first light, she was at the range alone. She retrieved the M2010 from the equipment room, photographed the transponder serial number from the battery compartment panel, replaced everything precisely as she had found it. Then she went to the firing line. 1 target, 1,000 meters, 1 round. She verified the result through the spotting scope and entered it in the black notebook. Then she walked back. Mac was in the staging area, awake since 0400 because he was 20 years old and had not yet learned to sleep through tension. He watched her come off the range access road in the pre-dawn gray, M2010 over her right shoulder, the eagle tattoo dark on her right bicep, the crop top still faintly marked with yesterday's clay, her face carrying nothing readable from 20 meters. She walked past him, stopped. I was 8 inches taller and 60 pounds heavier, and he felt, in a way he could not have explained to anyone, like the smaller of the 2 people standing in that yard. Mac, she said, specialist win. She looked at him with a complete look, the one that added you to the account of things that mattered and moved forward. Stay close to Rains today, she said. Whatever she tells you, do it. She walked on. He exhaled slowly. The breath made a thin cloud in the morning air before the heat took it. On the equipment board in the staging area, the OPFOR GPS transponder blinked steady green. Operational, nominal. It would blink that green light for the next 72 hours. It would not transmit a single accurate coordinate during any of them. Tatum checked it at the pre-mission briefing at 0530 and allowed himself one small controlled smile. He did not look in Wynn's direction. I should have. At 0500, the exercise clock started. C7 sector, a 4-story concrete training structure with 200 meters of open ground on 3 sides, backed by dense Louisiana pine to the north. Underneath it, a drainage culvert network that the original facility survey had documented in full, diameter ranging from 52 to 74 centimeters, running south under the open ground to a drainage ditch behind the fuel depot. Wynn had memorized every dimension and every junction from that survey. She had memorized it 3 weeks before she arrived at Fort Polk. In the same period, she had begun the 46th page of the black notebook that now sat under her kit bag in the equipment room. She stood at the C7 gate in the last seconds before the clock. The morning was gray and the pines were dark against a sky just beginning to separate from the night. She put her hand on the gate. 34 of you, she said quietly to the morning to no one. She pushed the gate and went in. She was gone before the first ranger element reached the perimeter. Gone the way water goes through a landscape. Not running, not hiding, moving through the system she had memorized in her mind 100 times before she ever moved through it in her body. The next thing Gord Tatum knew about Specialist Tara Wynn was a radio transmission at 0847 from his lead element on the first floor of the C7 structure, in a voice that was attempting to sound like a ranger and not fully managing it. Master Sergeant, you need to come to C7 right now, sir. What he found there would be the first of many things in the next 72 hours that he could not explain. But it would not be the last, and it would not be the worst. She had not fired a single round yet. She was just getting started. What Gord Tatum found on the first floor of the C7 structure at 0852 was something 15 years in the 75th Ranger Regiment had not prepared him for. 6 Rangers, his 6 best point men, seated in a straight line against the interior wall, backs to the concrete, knees drawn up. Their hands were zip-tied to the overhead plumbing pipe that ran the full length of the room, wrists secured with their own restraints, pulled from their own kit. Each man's M4 carbine had been field stripped with care, not roughly, carefully. The bolt carrier groups had been removed, the firing pins, the buffer springs. Each component placed on the corresponding man's lap in a neat row, smallest piece to the left, largest to the right, as if arranged by someone with a precise preference for order and the time to execute it. The rifles themselves leaned against the wall to the right of each owner, useless and unscratched. On the wall behind them, written in white chalk taken from the training aids room one floor up, were 4 words and 2 initials, 34 and left, TW. Tatum stood in the doorway for a long moment. He looked at his 6 men. He looked at the chalk. He looked at the bolt carrier groups arranged on 6 sets of knees. Not one of his men had a mark on him. Not a bloody lip. Not a bruised wrist from working against the restraints. Not a torn sleeve. They had been taken in a controlled space in the early hours of a training exercise that had been running for less than 2 hours, and not one of them had heard it coming. Private Eli Mack stood 3 steps behind Tatum in the doorway. He was looking at the 6 men, and then at the chalk, and then at the back of Tatum's neck. He said nothing because there was nothing that would have fit. Destiny Raines arrived 2 minutes later at a jog, stopped in the doorway, looked at the scene, and then looked at the ceiling as if she might find the answer up there. She did not find it. Nobody did. Because the answer was already somewhere else, already moving, already 2 steps ahead of every question being formed in that room. Tatum turned. His face had the quality of a lid being pressed down over something that wanted to get out. Get out. He keyed his radio. Alpha 6, what is your current sector? Static. Then a voice that was trying hard. Sir, we pulled back from C7 North to regroup. There was a shot, sir, no contact. We lost the drone. Tatum went still. Say again? The UAV, sir. It's down. Single paint marking round from the north sector took out the starboard rotor. She's not in C7. She hasn't been in C7 for at least an hour. Tatum looked at the chalk letters, at the number 34, which was now 34 minus 6, a subtraction he had not authorized and could not account for. He clicked the radio. All elements. She's north. Converge on grid November 7. The response came back fast and coordinated, and in the next 4 minutes, every available element of his direct assault company, all 34 Rangers assigned to the C7 sector, began moving toward the northern tree line. Tara Wynn was lying in the root cavity of a downed loblolly pine on the south side of the compound. She had been there for 11 minutes. The root ball was 4 feet across. The cavity underneath it was 18 inches deep. She fit inside it the way a round fits a chamber. The M2010 lay beside her, muzzle pointing south, bipod folded, scope cover protecting the glass. The northern tree line was 400 meters behind her. She listened to the radio traffic in her earpiece. She counted 30 seconds after the last transmission. Then she picked up the M2010, slung it across her back, and moved south. She did not run. Running makes noise and leaves marks. She moved at the pace of something that belongs where it is, low and deliberate through the knee-high grass of the exercise buffer zone, using the shadow of the equipment building to her right and the low morning sun angle to her left as natural concealment. She had calculated both the shadow position and the sun angle the evening before, lying on her bunk with a protractor in the facility survey map, and the real conditions were within 2 degrees of her calculation. She reached the drainage culvert at the south perimeter in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. 68 centimeters in diameter, just above the threshold she had marked on the survey. She went in head first with the M2010 extended in front of her, bipod folded, the scope cover on. The space smelled of standing water and mineral sediment and the faint chemical residue of maintenance work done on the pipe joints the previous spring. None of that mattered. What mattered was that it ran 230 meters south under the open ground and emerged in a drainage ditch behind the fuel depot, a position that Tatum's command element had vacated when he sent his assault force north. She moved through the culvert on her elbows. Fast. Practiced. The M2010 slid ahead of her through the dark like a promise being kept. Raines was still standing in the C7 doorway when she noticed the floor. She had been looking at it for almost a minute before her brain fully assembled what her eyes were seeing. The prints leading in came from the north entrance. 6 pairs of heavy Ranger combat boots in the standard 2x2 stack pattern of a tactical entry team. The prints leading out were different. One pair, light, smaller, the tread of a training shoe. The stride relaxed, the toe fall of someone who was not hurrying and had every reason not to be. The prints led to the south wall and stopped at a small maintenance hatch in the baseboard. 18 inches square, hinged, not latched. Rains crouched down and pulled the hatch open. Beyond it was darkness and the smell of concrete and moving water. She sat back on her heels and looked into the dark for a long moment. "She's been living down there," she said. Mac was behind her. He looked into the opening. He looked at Rains. "What do we do?" Rains thought about what Wynn had said 2 nights ago on the roof. "Trust the process, not me, the process." "We document," Rains said. She pulled the tactical notebook from her cargo pocket and began writing. 300 meters north, Tatum stood in a pine clearing with his 34 Rangers spread in a perimeter search pattern. The downed drone sat in the grass 20 feet away, its starboard rotor assembly cleanly separated by a single paint marking round. The round had come from an angle consistent with a position in the northern tree line. When his searchers reached the northern tree line, they found nothing. No boot prints in the pine straw, no crushed vegetation marking a firing position. Nothing. What they did but pressed upright into the soft earth at the base of one pine trunk was a spent 300-pound Winchester Magnum casing. One of his men brought it to him. Tatum turned it over in his fingers. He looked at the dimensions. A standard brass casing from a paint marking 300 Win Mag training round, indistinguishable from a live round casing until a forensic examination of the projectile itself confirmed the marking compound. The casing had been placed there deliberately, standing upright in the earth like a chess piece moved by a player who wanted the other side to know the move had been made. He put it in his chest pocket. His radio crackled. His comms sergeant. "Sir, anomaly on the OPFOR transponder. Signal showing her stationary at grid Charlie 7, but she's clearly not there." Tatum said nothing. "Sir?" He looked at the tree line. He looked at the empty clearing. He thought about the GPS transponder in the OPFOR gear room, the one he had serviced 2 nights ago with a dead battery, the one that was supposed to be giving him her exact position in real time. It was giving him a position. It was not giving him hers. Something moved inside his chest that was not a feeling he recognized because it was not one he had needed to recognize in 15 years. He pressed it down the way he pressed everything that was inconvenient when he made a decision. "All elements shift to contact protocols," he said. "Authorization Tatum 7. We are treating this as a live environment." A pause on the net. His company sergeant major. "Sir, that's live fire authorization. During a training exercise, we need Colonel Strock to—" "I am authorizing it," Tatum said. "Tatum 7, log it." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Logged, sir." He clicked off. He stood in the pine clearing with the Louisiana morning coming hard overhead, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of something he could not control simply by asserting authority over it. He pressed that down, too. He was good at pressing things down. He had had 15 years of practice. He should not have pressed it down this time. He should have let it speak. It knew what he didn't yet. In the medical support bay on the east side of the compound, Doc Prewitt heard the live fire authorization go out on the secondary monitoring frequency he had been running on his personal receiver since 0600. He was sitting at his desk with his kit bag open and a cup of coffee gone cold beside it. He heard the words Tatum 7 and live environment, and he set the coffee down with a steadiness that was entirely deliberate. He looked at his watch, 0931. He stood. He moved to the door and looked out toward the C7 sector. The compound was quiet now, the earlier activity having pushed north. Generator hum, distant percussion of movement in the pines. He picked up his kit bag and walked out. In the root system of a second-growth cypress on the east side of the fuel depot, Tara Wynn lay prone with the M2010 and received the live fire authorization through her earpiece with the same expression she had received that morning's weather report. Flat, attentive, processing. She had been expecting something like this. Not necessarily at 0931, not necessarily radioed rather than executed directly, but she had built this possibility into the plan from the first day because she had known who Gord Tatum was for 18 months. And she understood that men who have never accommodated losing have a predictable response when they begin to. They reach for force the way other men reach for a light switch. Automatically, without checking whether the power is on. The power in this situation was not on in any way he understood. She looked through the Schmidt and Bender scope. The fuel depot was empty. Beyond it, open ground running back to C7. Beyond that, the four-story concrete structure, roof visible through the morning haze. She had a clear line of sight to the antenna array on Tatum's command vehicle, parked on the East Service Road at 410 meters. She adjusted the elevation dial. 2 clicks up, 1 click right for the crosswind that had been running east-northeast since 0800. She breathed once, checking the calculation. The wind indicator she had placed in the grass 11 meters ahead of her position barely moved. She refined the windage by half a click. She did not reach for the trigger yet. Instead, she took from her cargo pocket a small battery-powered transmitter, roughly the size of a television remote, pre-tuned to the umpire coordination frequency. She switched it on. She placed it in the grass 6 inches to her left. It began transmitting her position as approximately 80 meters south-southwest of her actual location, close enough to be plausible, far enough to matter when someone came looking. Then she waited. 200 meters away, across the open ground, Doc Prewitt came out of the maintenance shed moving low along the drainage ditch. He had the handheld umpire unit he had checked out from range control on a standard medical support request form that morning, and it was showing him the transmitter signal at a position that was not quite where he was standing. He adjusted. He moved toward the cypress tree line. He found her the way you find something that does not want to be found by daylight. By the geometry of it. The straight line of the M2010 muzzle against a background that had no straight lines. He crouched behind the root ball and looked at her without speaking. She did not look up from the scope. He went live, Prewitt said quietly. I heard. When? I know, Doc. He looked at her profile, at the line of her jaw and the way her right hand lay along the stock and the eagle tattoo on her right bicep just visible below, where the crop top sleeve had been put in position. She was reading the wind through the indicator in the grass. She was completely still in the way that only becomes available to someone who has practiced stillness until it costs nothing. He just handed everything to you, Prewitt said. He handed it to himself, she said. I'm here to receive it. Prewitt looked at the transmitter in the grass. Where does he think you are? She told him the coordinates the transmitter was broadcasting. He nodded. Then he reached into his kit bag and brought out his personal phone. He opened the photograph of the GPS transponder with the dead battery, timestamp, and serial number visible. He held it toward her, not for her to look at because she didn't need to see it, but as a confirmation delivered between two people who have been working toward the same point from different angles. 12 minutes of audio from the radio net this morning, he said, including the live fire call, including the sergeant major's response. She was quiet for a moment. The wind indicator held steady. She made a half-click final adjustment. Give it to Strock, she said. Not yet? Not yet. Wait for the shot. He looked at her. What shot? She did not answer. She had gone into the kind of stillness that has a different quality from the ordinary kind. The stillness of a calculation that has reached its final form and is waiting only for the conditions to align. He waited with her. She fired. The round traveled 410 meters at 2,700 feet per second and severed the coaxial cable connecting the whip antenna to the command radio in Tatum's vehicle. Not destroyed. Severed. Clean through the cable at the point where it fed from the external whip into the vehicle body. The system went from full broadcast to zero between one transmission and the next. In the pine clearing to the north, Tatum pressed the radio handset to his ear and heard nothing. In the drainage ditch to the east, Prewitt looked at the antenna hanging at 45 degrees from a single remaining strand of braid. He looked at the distance. He looked at the point of severance on the cable. He exhaled very slowly. Then he looked down. At the base of the cypress root, pressed into the soft earth beside the firing position, was a small folded piece of paper. He had not seen her place it. She must have done it before he arrived. He unfolded it. 3 words, in the same small, precise handwriting. You were warned. He put it in his breast pocket next to the photograph. He looked up. Wind was already breaking down the position, M2010 going into the drag bag, her shape compressing as she moved back into the culvert entrance without a sound. He picked up his kit bag and started walking toward the command building. Not running. She had told him there was time, and he had learned over 2 years of working alongside Tara Wynn that when she said there was time, And when she said there wasn't, you were already behind. Mac found him on the service road. The young private had been looking for him for 20 minutes, and when he found him, his breathing was off and his eyes had the look of someone who has been carrying weight. He is not sure how to set down. Sergeant, last night, the equipment room, I need to tell you something. Prewitt looked at him. The transponder. Mac went still. You already know. Tell me anyway. Full account, times included. Mac told him everything. The time he had seen the storage room light on, the angle of the shadow through the window gap, the figure at the gear rack. Prewitt listened without interrupting. When Mac finished, Prewitt nodded once. Did you tell anyone else? Rains, this morning, before the exercise. She wrote it in her notebook. Prewitt was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, fine Rains, tell her to keep that notebook on her person at all times until I come for it. Not in her kit, on her body. Mac nodded, turned. Mac, he stopped. Prewitt looked at him with the level assessment of someone who has spent 25 years identifying which young soldiers have it. You did the right thing. Both times. Mac held the look, nodded once, went. In the pine clearing to the north, Gord Tatum was standing in the middle of a field with 34 Rangers in a search perimeter, in a dead radio, in a growing awareness that something had gone wrong at a structural level he had not anticipated. His direct assault element had found nothing in the northern tree line. His drone was down from a paint round he could not assign a source to. His command vehicle antenna was severed from a shot he could not explain. His GPS tracking system was showing him a position that was clearly wrong. And the chalk message on the C7 wall said 34 left, which was the exact number of men in his direct assault element, which meant she had known before the exercise started exactly how many men he was sending against her. He took the spent brass casing from his chest pocket and turned it in his fingers. He should have understood then. He was close to understanding. The information was all present. He keyed the backup radio instead. All elements, tighten the net around C7, full contact protocols. I want her boxed. His sergeant major came on immediately, voice careful. Sir, we have umpires noting the live fire authorization. Colonel Strock's office has been trying to reach you on primary. Primary is down, Tatum said. I will contact command once the sector is secured. He clicked off. The silence on the net after that had its own texture. The texture of 34 men making simultaneous private calculations about what they were being asked to be part of, and whether the answer to that calculation was one they were prepared to accept. Rains, standing at the 4th floor access door of the C7 structure, heard Tatum's order on the secondary net. She wrote the time in her notebook. 10:14. She wrote the order verbatim. She wrote the sergeant major's response and the timestamp of the silence that followed. Then she looked out through the 4th floor window toward the eastern tree line. Nothing, open ground, morning light coming across it at an angle that made every shadow long. No movement, no shape. Just Louisiana and the pines and the sky going from gray to blue overhead. She looked at the maintenance hatch in the floor, the hinges she had tested and found recently oiled. She began to understand, with a clarity that arrived slowly and then all at once, what kind of planning she had been watching from its edges. Not reactive planning, not improvisation, architecture, a structure built around a precise knowledge of what Tatum would do when he felt challenged and what he would do when he felt cornered, and what both of those responses would cost him if someone was patient enough and methodical enough to document them in real time as they happened. She put her hand on the notebook in her cargo pocket, kept writing. At 1:27, Tara Wynn emerged from the eastern drainage outlet behind the perimeter berm of the fuel depot. She moved without the M2010. The rifle was cached 40 meters back in the culvert, resting on a concrete ledge above the waterline, inside a waterproof bag she had packed specifically for this purpose. Serial number facing up, ready for recovery when the exercise clock ended. She did not need it now. She needed something different. She walked across the open ground between the fuel depot and the C7 structure. Upright, no cover, at a normal walking pace, the gray crop top visible, the eagle tattoo on her right bicep visible, her hands open and empty at her sides. Her blonde hair had come mostly loose from the tie that had held it since 0500 and moved around her face in the Louisiana heat. She was visible from 3 elevated positions. She had identified all 3 from the facility survey before her first day at Fort Polk. She stopped in the middle of the open ground and stood still. In the command post, a ranger on observation duty looked through his binoculars and said quietly, "Sir, grid Charlie 7 Center. She's standing in the open, arms at her sides, just standing." Tatum took the binoculars. He looked. She was exactly as described. Hands open, facing his command post direction, not moving. "All elements," he said, "converge. Grid Charlie 7 Center, now." They came from 3 directions. 34 Rangers closing a perimeter around a single figure in the open ground outside C7, and the perimeter closed in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, which was efficient and well-drilled and did not matter in any way that counted, because when they reached her, she was still standing in exactly the same position with her hands open and her expression carrying the thing it had always carried, the flat, patient certainty of someone who has been moving toward a fixed point for a very long time and has arrived. Tatum pushed through the inner ring and stopped 10 feet from her. He looked at her. She looked back. There was no fear in her and no triumph and no performance of either. There was the same quality she had brought to the range on the first night, to the mud, to the forward sentence she had given him after he knocked her sideways into the clay. The quality of something that has decided where it is going and cannot be moved from that decision by anything in the normal range of pressures. He said, "It's over, Specialist." She said, "Look up, Master Sergeant." He looked. On the roof of the C7 structure, 4 stories up, Doc Prewitt stood with a military-grade recording camera on his shoulder. The red recording light was visible at this distance. He had been there for 13 minutes, since before Tatum's elements began closing the perimeter. The camera had been running the entire time. Beside Prewitt, Colonel Avery Strock stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking down at the scene below with the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and is now watching it happen precisely as he expected it would. 2 figures stood slightly behind Strock, Legal Corps insignia on their collars, both watching. Tatum's backup radio crackled. Strock's voice, even and unhurried. "Master Sergeant Tatum, stand your men down. You are relieved of exercise command pending formal review. Please come to the command building." 34 Rangers did not move for 1 full second. Then slowly muzzles came down. Men looked at each other. They looked at the roof. They looked at Tatum. Tatum's radio dropped to his side. He looked at Wynn. His face was doing what faces do when 15 years of self-narration meets the fact of what a person actually is. And the meeting is not a negotiation. She did not look away. "You were never here to train," he said. "No. The whole time." "Yes." He looked at the notebook she was not carrying, at the place on her hip where he had seen it before, then at her empty hands, then at her face. He reached into his chest pocket and took out the spent casing he had been carrying since the pine clearing. The one she had placed standing upright in the earth like a chess piece advanced with intention. He turned it in his fingers once. Then he looked at her. She waited. I had nothing left to put in the space between them. She had not thrown a single punch. She had not raised her voice. She had not, in 72 hours of a training exercise that had become something else, done anything outside the documented protocols of Operation Iron Meridian, except that each of her actions had been time-stamped and witnessed and built on the one before it. And the person who had left the protocols was the man currently standing in a field with 34 of his own Rangers looking at him with an expression he would spend the rest of his career trying not to remember. She turned and walked toward the command building. 34 men watched her go. Not one of them said a word, not because they had been ordered to stay quiet, because there was nothing that would have fit inside the space the last 4 hours had made in the morning. On the roof, Prewitt lowered the camera. He looked at Strock. Strock said, "Good." One word, said the way you say a word when a long thing has reached its correct end and there is nothing useful to add to it. The recording light on the camera was still red, still running. Prewitt let it run. Below, Tara Wynn walked across the open ground in the midday Louisiana sun, her shadow long behind her, the eagle on her right bicep moving with the motion of her stride, beak open, eyes fixed on whatever it had always been fixed on. The thing that was coming. The thing that was already here. The formal review convened 48 hours after the exercise clock stopped. Not in a courtroom. The Army does not always use courtrooms for the things that need to happen inside them. It uses conference rooms with metal folding chairs and fluorescent lighting and tables that have absorbed 3 decades of coffee rings and the particular tension of people who are required to be honest with each other inside an institution that has spent 3 decades teaching them to be careful about honesty. The room was on the second floor of the Fort Polk Command Building. It smelled of dry erase markers and industrial cleaner, and something underneath both of those things that was simply the smell of consequences. Gathering. 6 chairs on one side of the table, 2 on the other. Colonel Avery Strock at the head. Beside him, the 2 JAG officers who had been standing on the C-7 rooftop, both now in service dress, folders open. Doc Pruitt to Strock's left as primary witness of record. Destiny reigns beside Pruitt, her tactical notebook on the table, its cover worn from 2 days of being held rather than stored. Gord Tatum on the other side with his legal counsel, a major named Burwell from the regimental JAG office who had the posture of a man who has read a file and understands that the file is not going where his client was hoping. The chair at the end of the table, nearest the door, was empty. It stayed empty for exactly 2 minutes past the scheduled start. Strock looked at his watch once. Nobody commented. Then the door opened. Tara Wynne walked in, still wearing the gray crop top. Washed now, the red clay gone, but the same garment. The same scoop neck, the same hemline, the eagle tattoo on her right bicep fully visible. She was not in service dress. She was not required to be. She was present as witness and subject matter participant, not as an accused party, and she had dressed the way she always dressed, which was the way she had been dressed when she lay on a mat in the dark and put a round through a target at 1,000 meters, and it was the only way anyone in that room had seen her. She sat down. She placed the small black notebook on the table. She looked at no one in particular. Strock said, "We're on record." One of the JAG officers pressed the record function on the device in the center of the table. What followed lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. Most of it was procedural in the particular way of formal military reviews. Careful institutional language establishing facts before feelings, record before judgment, timeline before motive. Pruitt presented the photograph of the GPS transponder with the dead battery, the timestamp and serial number both in frame. Raines presented her tactical notebook, which the JAG officer received and paged through with the expression of someone reading a document he is simultaneously impressed by and made uncomfortable by. The audio recording of the live fire authorization went into the record. The room listened to all of it, including the sergeant major's response and the silence that followed. That silence, played back through a speaker in a conference room, had a different quality than it had had on the radio net. Heavier, more specific. Tatum's counsel objected to several items on procedural grounds. Strock sustained none of the objections. He did it without drama or visible satisfaction, with the economy of a man who has conducted reviews before and knows that the shortest path through an objection is a clear ruling and forward motion. Then Tatum spoke. He had prepared something. You could see it in the way his counsel had organized the folder, the way Burwell had tabbed specific pages. Tatum spoke for 11 minutes. What he said was essentially the argument that the exercise had been escalated by Opfer's own behavior, that the GPS anomaly was a legitimate equipment failure rather than deliberate interference, that the live fire authorization was within his discretionary authority as exercise commander under specific threat conditions, and that the targeting of training assets, specifically the UAV, by a paint marking round constituted disproportionate Opfer action that had itself created the conditions requiring escalation. I made these points clearly. He had spent 15 years learning the specific vocabulary that institutional authority recognizes and respects. He was not stupid. He had never been stupid. The problem was not his intelligence. The problem was that the room contained Pruitt's photograph and Raines' notebook and 47 minutes of recorded audio and a woman sitting at the end of the table who had, over 18 months, anticipated every argument he was now making and built its counter into the documentation she had assembled before he made it. When Tatum finished, the JAG officer looked at Wynne. "Specialist Wynne, you've heard Master Sergeant Tatum's account. Is there anything you'd like to add to the record?" She looked at the JAG officer, then at Tatum. One even beat. "The UAV was a training asset operating within the designated exercise sector," she said. "Targeting it with a paint marking round was within Opfer parameters under Section 4.2 of the Iron Meridian Exercise Brief. The round I used was a 300 caliber paint marking projectile, training ammunition, Opfer authorized. The rotor assembly failed on impact because it was spinning at 11,000 RPM when the projectile struck it. The asset was grounded, not destroyed. There is a distinction in both the exercise protocols and in the incident classification standards. She paused. Master Sergeant Tatum's incident report describes the round as a Baum 300 Winchester Magnum Lave round. That report was filed before the umpire team completed their forensic review of the downed aircraft. She reached into her cargo pocket and placed a folded document on the table without unfolding it. That is a copy of the umpire team's subsequent report, filed at Went 600 on the day of the exercise. The original is in the range control file. The umpire report confirms the round was a paint-marking projectile. Oui, Bersois? Burwell put his hand on Tatum's arm. He leaned in. Tatum did not visibly respond. His jaw moved once, the particular movement of a jaw when something needs to be said, and the moment for saying it has already closed. The JAG officer picked up the document, unfolded it, read it, passed it to his colleague. His colleague read it without expression and placed it in the folder. The room was quiet. Strzok had not moved since the session began. He sat at the head of the table with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes tracking between speakers with the particular attention of a man who has been following things carefully for 31 years and no longer needs to show that he is doing it. He was 57 years old. He had been in conference rooms like this one many times. He knew what the specific quality of this silence meant. The silence that settles over a formal review when the record has become definitive, and the only remaining question is the shape of the consequence. Not relief, not victory, something more sober. The recognition that a thing wrong for a long time has been formally confirmed as wrong, and that confirmation has its own gravity, different from anger and more lasting than satisfaction. This was that silence. Tatum's counsel closed his tabbed folder. He put his pen away. He looked at the table in the careful way of a man managing an organized withdrawal. One of the JAG officers said, "Master Sergeant Tatum, the record as constituted presents a pattern of conduct that includes undocumented modification of safety equipment, unauthorized escalation of training protocols, and submission of an incident report materially inconsistent with subsequent umpire findings. The review board will make its formal determination within 72 hours. I want to advise you at this time that the recommendation before the board includes immediate suspension of training command authority and referral for formal Article 32 investigation." Tatum looked at the JAG officer. He looked at Strzok. He looked at the black notebook on the table in front of Wynne. He said, "How long have you been building this?" She looked at him. The pause was not dramatic, just the natural beat of someone who wants to answer accurately. 18 months, she said. Since the report. Since the report. He looked at the notebook, at the eagle on her right arm, beak open, fixed, at the worn spine of the black cover that had 46 pages of documentation before the Fort Polk section even began. "Kandahar," he said. "Yes. I didn't think anyone was watching that closely." She looked at him for a moment. "I was the only one watching it," she said. "That was the problem. We sat with that. The room sat with it. There was no anger left in it from either direction, because anger is a form of energy, and what was in the room now had moved past energy into the territory of plain established fact, where things are what they are and have always been what they are, and the only change is that now the record confirms it." Tatum reached into the breast pocket of his service coat. He brought out the spent 300 Win Mag casing. The paint-marking brass she had left standing upright in the pine clearing, like a chess piece placed with intention. I had been carrying it since the exercise. He set it on the table between them. He did not say anything. He pushed it toward her with one finger. She looked at it. She did not pick it up. Strzok said, "We're adjourned pending the board's determination." Chairs moved. Folders closed. Burwell said something quietly to Tatum as they stood, and Tatum walked toward the door without looking at anyone. He stopped once with his hand on the frame, his back to the room for 2 full seconds. Then he went through. Pruitt gathered his kit bag. Raines took her notebook and held it close, one hand over the cover. In the hallway, Mac was against the wall, and when Raines came through the door, he looked at her face and exhaled slowly. Wynne was the last one out. She carried the black notebook. The spent casing was still on the table where Tatum had left it. She had not taken it. It had already done what it was meant to do. The hallway was bright with afternoon light coming through the east-facing windows. laying itself across the floor and in long panels that shifted as the clouds moved outside. Strzok came out behind her and fell into step the way Prewitt had done 2 days ago. The way people who have been close to something significant move when it is over, not wanting to be entirely separate from it yet. They walked to the end of the hall. Strzok looked out the window at the compound below, the range access road, the 1,000-meter firing lane, empty now with the target frames standing bare in the afternoon wind. "You could have filed a complaint in Kandahar," he said, "the day you came back." "Yes, it would have been handled. It would have been noted," she said. "That's not the same thing." He looked at her sideways. The expression on his face was not quite a smile, more the look of a man confirming a conclusion he reached a long time ago and is now watching verified. "No," he said, "it isn't." He looked back out the window. Below, the compound was doing its late afternoon business. Soldiers moving between buildings, vehicles on the service roads, the ordinary machinery of a military installation that continues regardless of what happens inside its conference rooms. "The formal determination will take 72 hours, he said. Then he'll be transferred. The Article 32 will take longer, months. I know. You'll be called to provide additional documentation. I have it." He looked at her for a moment. "All of it. All of it," she said. "The Fort Polk section starts on page 47. He absorbed this without a visible reaction. Then, "Where did you cache the rifle?" "Covert Access Junction, Grid November Bravo 6. On the ledge above the waterline, inside a waterproof bag, serial number facing up. I'll have the range crew retrieve it. I'd like to do it myself." He looked at her. "I want to walk the route one more time before anyone else goes in," she said. He understood. She had spent 2 days learning that drainage system with her body, crawling it in the dark with a rifle ahead of her and 18 months of weight behind her. And the need to walk it once more in daylight, upright and without urgency, was not about the rifle. It was about the particular requirement of people who have survived a long, difficult thing to see where they were when it was finished and confirm with their own senses that they came through. "Sundown," he said, "before the range crew goes in tomorrow morning." "Thank you, sir." He walked back toward his office. She watched him go. Then she turned toward the equipment building, the black notebook under her arm, the light through the east-facing windows crossing her as she walked. Rains was on the equipment room steps when Wynne arrived. Sitting with her back against the door, legs stretched out, the look of someone who has finished thinking and reached the place where the thinking has run out. And what comes next is sitting with what the thinking produced. Wynne sat beside her on the steps. The afternoon was going orange over the compound. The long Louisiana evening constructing itself out of the day's end, and somewhere past the tree line, a bird was calling something repetitive and patient. They sat without talking for a while. Then Rain said, "The list in your notebook. 10 crossed out. Who are the other 2? "People I haven't completed documentation on yet." "Are they at Fort Polk?" "No. That's where you're going." Wynne said nothing for a moment. The bird kept calling. The light kept going orange. "What comes next," Wynne said, "is the culvert." Rains looked at her. "I need to walk it before sundown. Come with me if you want." Rains looked at her boots, then at the tree line. She stood. They crossed the compound together in the slanting light, past the motor pool in the medical bay, in the staging area where 34 Rangers had stood in a perimeter that morning and watched something they would carry for 20 years. Past the C7 structure, its 4 stories throwing a long shadow eastward. On the first floor, the chalk was mostly scuffed away under boots and time, 2 fragments still faintly readable if you knew where to look. TW. Just that, the rest gone. They reached the south perimeter drainage access. Wynne pulled a flashlight from her cargo pocket and went in head first. Rains watched the entrance for a moment, then followed. The culvert was 68 centimeters across. Rains was larger than Wynne and felt it in her shoulders, the concrete pressing equally on both sides. She could see the flashlight ahead, the circle of it moving steadily through the dark, and she moved after it on her elbows with the smell of mineral sediment and old water and something faintly chemical from last spring's maintenance work surrounding her. They came out into the drainage ditch behind the fuel depot 2 minutes later. Wynne stood in the ditch and let the evening come over her. Warm, pine and diesel, and something underneath both that was simply the Louisiana ground itself, old and specific and indifferent. She looked at the fuel depot, the open ground beyond it, the cypress tree line to the east where she had lain with the M2010 and cut a coaxial cable at 410 meters. She stood there for a while without saying anything. Rain stood beside her. She was looking at the same things in the way you look at a place when you know what happened there. When the ground has been changed by what it contained and the change is invisible to everyone who was not present for the containing. How many times did you come through that culvert? Rains said. 4. 3 in the dark. 3 in the dark. Rains looked back at the entrance behind them, the round opening of the pipe in the failing light. She tried to hold the image of moving through it at night with a rifle and a plan. 18 months in the making and 34 rangers looking for her in the wrong direction. What she felt holding that image was something close to vertigo, not from height but from depth, from the sudden full apprehension of how much distance there is between what she had observed and what she had understood while observing it. I've been thinking about what you told me, Rain said. On the roof. You said if I'd said something when he hit you, they'd have handled it informally. He'd have been back by Thursday. Yes, but you could also have just filed a complaint after. Done it the standard way. Wynne looked at her. The standard way produced 6 hours on a Kandahar floor in 47-degree heat in a report that said the error was mine. She said it without heat, the way you report weather. The standard way works when the person making the report is honest. When they're not, it produces a file that says the wrong thing and stays said. So you built a different record. I built a better one. They stood a moment longer. Then Wynne moved to the culvert junction where she had cached the rifle and retrieved the M2010 from the waterproof bag on the concrete ledge above the waterline, serial number facing up. She checked the scope housing, worked the bolt, dry-fired once into the concrete to confirm the trigger brake. Clean, exactly as she had left it. She slung it over her right shoulder. They walked back through the orange light, past the structures and the service roads. And when they reached the equipment room, Wynne unlocked the weapon rack, slid the M2010 into its slot and locked it back. She stood in front of the rack and looked at the rifle through the mesh. It had not fired a single round at a person in 72 hours. It had taken down a drone rotor and severed a coaxial cable. It had been carried through drainage culverts and cached in waterproof bags and fired at paper targets before any of it started. It had done exactly what was required of it and nothing beyond that, because the situation had not required anything beyond that. And Wynne had understood the situation more precisely than anyone else on the compound. She closed the equipment room door. 3 days later, Strock came to her in the weapons maintenance bay. She was cleaning the M2010 every third day regardless of use, because a tool you depend on is a tool you maintain, a principle she had absorbed from a machinist father in western Montana at an age when most lessons were still abstract. Strock set a sealed envelope on the bench beside her cleaning cloth. She looked at it. She looked at him. Orders, he said. She picked it up, her name on the front, a classification stamp. Red wax seal on the back. Not at standard, which meant it had been handled above regimental level. The board came back, Strock said. Tatum is suspended pending Article 32. He will not return to JRTC. She nodded. The 2009 Kandahar Incident Report has been formally reopened. The correct determination will be entered into the permanent record. She nodded again. Neither of these were surprises. She had built both of them into the plan from before she arrived. She turned the envelope over. Where? The destination is classified. You'll be briefed on arrival. She put the envelope in her cargo pocket without opening it. Thank you, sir. Strock looked at her, at the M2010 and components on the bench, the bolt and the firing pin, and the trigger assembly laid out in order, smallest to largest, the way she always arranged them, and then at the eagle tattoo on her right arm, and the expression on his face was the one he had worn on the roof of C7, the expression of a man not being surprised but being confirmed. He walked out. She looked at the components on the bench and began reassembling the rifle. Trigger assembly first, then the firing pin, then the bolt. Each piece going where it belonged with the sound of metal on metal, clean and certain, the language of something designed to function precisely under precise conditions. She heard the door. She did not look up. Rains, she knew the footfall. Rains sat on the bench across the cleaning station and watched for a moment. Orders? Yes. When? Tomorrow morning. Rains looked at the black notebook on the corner of the bench, the other two names. Wynne set the bolt into the receiver, cycled it. Yes. You'll find what you need. Not a question. The statement of someone who has watched a process from close enough to understand how it works. Wynne looked up for the first time since Rains came in. The flat, pale eyes, not cold, only deep. The eyes of someone looking from a long way back and not in any hurry about what they see. "The notebook," Wynne said. "Keep yours." Rains looked at the tactical notebook in her cargo pocket, the one she had kept on her body for 2 days because Prewitt had told her to. She had filled 22 pages during the exercise. Timestamps, orders, observations. A habit that had not existed before and would not be put down now. "Why, Rena?" Rena said. "Because the next time someone in your chain of command does what Tatum did," Wynne said, "you'll know what to write down." She paused. "And you'll know how early to start." Rain sat with that. The room held the sound of the M2010 being made whole again, piece by piece, each component finding its place. In the morning, Wynne slung her kit bag over one shoulder and the M2010 drag bag over the other and walked out of the Fort Polk billeting area at 0545. The compound was just beginning to move. Early risers on the service roads, mess hall lights on, generators humming in the Louisiana pre-dawn. Mac was at the gate, not on duty. He had come to be there. He was standing beside the checkpoint with his hands in his pockets and the particular look of a 20-year-old who has learned something he did not know he was going to learn and is still working out what to do with knowing it. She stopped in front of him. He said, "I've been thinking about putting in for SFES." She looked at him. The Special Forces Assessment and Selection Program. The longest, most demanding application of patience and competence that the Army formally offered. "Good," she said. "You think I'm ready?" She looked at him for a moment. At the way he stood. At the way he had stood in the back row of the range on the first night, teeth locked, watching something wrong happen, and not yet knowing what the right response was. At the way he had walked to Prewitt the next morning with what he knew, without being asked, because he understood it was the right thing to do even at 20 years old and 3 months into his first posting. "You were ready before you got here," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." She walked through the gate. The Louisiana morning was already warm, the light just beginning to come up pink above the tree line, and the road ran straight through the pines for a long way before it bent and went somewhere she could not see from here. She did not look back. Inside the compound, on the first floor of the C7 structure, the remaining chalk on the wall caught the first light through the east-facing windows. Most of it was gone now, scuffed away over 3 days by boots and time and the indifferent passage of use. 2 fragments still faintly visible, just legible if you knew what you were looking for. TW. Just that, just the initials. The rest gone. Enough. In the weapons maintenance bay, the black notebook sat on the corner of the bench where she had left it. She had photographed every page with the small backup camera she carried in her right cargo pocket before she set it down. The images were encrypted on a device that was now in her kit bag, heading wherever the sealed orders said to go next. The notebook she had left for Rains, open to the page with the 12 names, 10 crossed out, 2 remaining in the same small precise hand, clean and certain, waiting. She had left it as a record of process, not as a task. What Rains did with it was Rains's decision. What Wynne did with the photographs on the encrypted device was not yet a story. It was the opening line of one. And somewhere on the road beyond the pines, in the warm Louisiana morning, going bright and flat and certain, Specialist Tara Wynne walked toward whatever the sealed orders contained, carrying what she needed and nothing she didn't. And the thing she carried most carefully was not in any bag or any pocket, but in the space where 18 months of patience had lived. The particular quality of someone who understands that the right tool applied at the right moment, with the right documentation behind it, is more durable than any amount of force. She would be ready when that moment came. She had always been ready. She just had not always had the proof.